President Biden taking aim at his predecessor in the State of the Union, calling him his predecessor, warning of the threats the former president poses to our democracy, in his view. In just the last hour, the Republican National Committee officially recognized Donald Trump as its presumptive nominee.
I am going to ask you to join me as recognizing President Trump as our nominee and the next president of the United States. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Of course, they also voted to replace her with his choices, including his daughter-in-law. Joining us now, Jen Psaki, host of Inside with Jen Psaki on MSNBC, and a former Biden White House press secretary. Of course, Inside with Jen Psaki at noon Sunday and Monday night in Prime at 8 o'clock. And Michael Steele, co-host of The Weekend, right here on MSNBC, and former Republican National Committee chairman and Lieutenant Governor of Maryland. So, Jen, first to you. You've worked on a fair share of State of the Union addresses. And what did you think of the messaging, the performance last night?
Yeah, 9 or 10. I'm not sure. I was trying to remember it last night, Andrea. But look, I think that this was probably the most political State of the Union speech we've heard in some time. And it was purposeful on their part. I think how aggressive it was even surprised me. But it was meeting the moment of what I think a lot of people in the Democratic Party, people who are sitting there, maybe sitting on the sidelines, were eager for, were yearning for to hear from the president. What I thought was really interesting is the order of events in the State of the Union is a strategic decision. And it was kind of bookended with a big sweeping message on democracy, of course, tied to Ukraine, tied to Putin and the evils of Putin, and a sweeping democracy riff at the end. And that really does tell you, Andrea, about the time we're living in. The last thing I want to hear what Michael Steele has to say, and I watched him a lot at midnight and 1 a.m. last night, is I thought the moment with the Supreme Court on abortion was one of the most interesting moments. As you both know well, President Biden is a traditionalist. He's an institutionalist, especially when it comes to our judicial system. And you could feel the anger from him over Dobbs and over some of the recent actions of the Supreme Court. And I thought that was a particularly powerful moment.
It was. And of course, the three of the six justices sitting there were, against the Dobbs decision, but didn't matter. He was speaking to the people that he wanted to address, and they were very impassive, as of course they would be. Michael, what did you think of Senator Katie Britt's response last night? It's always hard, especially after such an energetic speech where he used the chamber, he played off of people as effectively as Joe Biden did. So it's always hard to do an effective speech, and especially one that has to be pre-written before you see how well he was going to deliver it. So it did not match that way. But what about the presentation, the setting, and all of the above?
Yeah, it's a good example of being overcoached. I've seen Senator Britt in other circumstances and situations. She's far better than what we saw last night. It was actually is a shame that she was put in that position by the team around her. And it just, again, trying to appeal to white suburban women, which is the whole kitchen tableau, which wound up offending a lot of women because it sort of, created a backdrop or a subtext that really fell flat. I thought she, was really put in an awkward position. I've argued for probably the last 15, 20 years. This whole response to the State of the Union is a farce. It's a joke. It is not good for both Democrats and Republicans. Everybody gets, slammed by this. Just send up a statement and move on, because everyone fixates on the performance and not the words. Then the response is muted simply because it's the president you're responding to who's standing in the well of the Congress. You're not going to beat that. There's no circumstance, even if the president makes a mistake, you're not going to trump that moment. So I thought she was put in a very difficult position to begin with, made more difficult by the way she was coached to deliver that message, which clearly is not consistent with other examples of her speaking in other scenarios.
And Jen, very briefly, the other sort of discomfort last night was really the speaker. his heart may be with Ukraine funding, but he does have to take the hit for the fact that it isn't not even on the floor, and the border bill as well. So you could see at certain times where he almost wanted to, like, early childhood education. Who's against that? But yeah, he was almost smiling and trying to control his smiles.
It was bizarre to watch, Andrea. I mean, you have covered many of these. Michael and I have watched many of them. There are moments where they're traditionally, historically, and we're not in a normal time, we all know that, where there is bipartisan agreement to applaud, to stand up. And there were many moments, including the president's very strong riff against Putin, against authoritarianism. That, if you go back 5-10 years ago, would have been a moment that would have had some booming cheers from Republicans in that chamber. And you saw the Speaker of the House kind of sitting on his hands. He also didn't stand up for cancer, fighting cancer. I mean, who's against that? And many moments where it would have been traditional. I'm not sure he knew what to do, is my assessment. He seemed to have a strange smirk on his face. He was clapping under the table. I don't know. But if you're watching at home and you didn't know who he was, you might be wondering why he didn't stand up, say, when the president was talking about doing more to address fentanyl, and things like that seem like no-brainers that there should be agreement on.